Hello and welcome to another New Game Plus. This is becoming a hopefully yearly tradition for us now. We just wrapped up our Itchmas extravaganza, and now it's time to do a Fantasy Critic League retrospective for 2022. So obviously today I'm joined by my two regular hosts, Rick,
Yeah.
Paula,
Hello.
and the one and only mastermind behind the whole Fantasy Critic League. Welcome back, Avatage. Well, not the whole
Hey,
our
how's it
Fantasy
going?
Critic League.
No, I invented the whole thing. That's okay.
Yeah, no, he made the whole thing. No one fact check us. No one can check if that's true or not.
They don't have to. It's true. It's done.
Sorry to Steve if you're listening.
Yeah, sorry, Steve. But our particular league. Anyway, so we thought we would do is kind of the same thing we did last year. We had like a little sort of like chat up. We have a couple questions that we'll go through here that are kind of similar to the ones that we did last year. And we're just gonna take a look first and foremost at how the league went, and we'll look at each of the rosters, talk a little bit about some of the differences this year compared to last year, and then at the end we're going to take a little look towards the future. As we're recording this, the 2023 draft is almost completed. The counter picks still have to be done, but we're basically at the end there. So we're going to take a look at some of what people have, and yeah, should be fun.
It's looking good.
Indeed. So why don't we start actually with the main one here is how has 2022 how has 2022 been different to 2021 for the league in general? Because I noticed there were definitely a few differences this year.
Well, yeah. I mean, for me anyway, I think the main difference that I kind of have noticed between even 2020, I think was 2020 was our first one, then 21, and then going into 2022, we had the most players we've had since we started, but there were a lot more high-scoring players.
Yeah.
So everyone kind of rose up a bit and kind of got towards the top a bit closer than previous years. There was much more disparity between the top and the bottom. There's still a fair bit of disparity between the top and the bottom, but there were more towards the top than the bottom, which was kind of cool. Which kind of lends itself to, I think, a lot more people were being a bit more strategic in 2022 than we had been previously. And even though people had been strategic previously, they were pretty much the ones at the top, and everyone else seemed to be just having a bit of fun picking games and that kind of thing. Whereas it kind of got a bit serious last year, and it was a bit more competitive in that sense. And with the introduction of our second counter pick as well, that seemed to make a lot of difference too, because the people who did really well tended to have good counter picks, and vice versa. Like people who bombed or kind of got shafted in a way. Like some of them had really good rosters, but ended up in the mid pack or that kind of thing. Tended to have counter picks down. Myself included. My roster was a bit pants anyway. There's some real killer counter picks that we're in the 10s and above or 15s and 20s that people ran last year. So you fall because zero at least for that's my most.
Yeah, no, I'm with you too. I feel like in 21 in particular, like I came out that top, but I didn't even break 100 points, right? Like this year we had both like the winner Clumsy, the winner Clumsy, we came out with 160 games, 100, but like behind us, it was much closer, I think, this year in general, and like for most of the year, because like. Yeah, the next top scorer were 86 and 86, so like they were basically almost tied, right? Like pretty close. So like it was definitely right up until the end too. There were like it was kind of like I don't know who's going to be next, because Froy was like leading the whole year basically until like literally right at the end, like September, October-ish or something is when that lead slipped. And whereas like in 2021, I think I'd come out kind of on a quick lead, and then it became kind of difficult to surmount, because I also think 2021 there weren't as many there weren't that many big hitter games that came out that year. Like the points were, I don't know, they felt lower in general.
Well, I feel like as well last year, like that's a very good point about the late releases and that sort of thing, because I think positions changed at the top right up until maybe November or even December, I think, with a couple of releases. Like it kept everyone jostling about a bit, and that's how close it was. But I think last year was perhaps it felt like the first year that didn't have any COVID impact. So 2020 was delay after delay after delay, and basically everything got thrown out the window. Whatever your plans were, too bad. And 2021 was a bit better, but there was still lots of delays and that sort of thing. Whereas last year there was, yeah, like we say, there were big games still being released right up to Christmas and that sort of thing that really made a difference. So you couldn't, like get an early lead and just sit there. You had to have something coming later on in the year as well. And
I know. I also think
really...
this year introduced what I'm going to call the new meta of Fantasy Critic League, which is the indie Game Pass game. Because I, like, straight up, so Chained Echoes, and then for me, Floppy Nights, and there are a few others. There are these small indie games that release on Game Pass, and they'll get 4 reviews from motherfuckers who love these games. Like, absolutely adore them. And they will get no other reviews. They'll get just enough to get on Open Critic and have, like, a crazy high score. Like, you know, higher than big league games, right? And they will just boom you points. Like, look at, like, Clumsy Get Chained Echoes got a 90-something. It doesn't have many reviews on Open Critic. And it probably is a fantastic game. But it's like, also, Floppy Nights, the one I had, it has 15 points on Metacritic, on Open Critic. It has barely any reviews. I'm certain it's not an 85 game, but it does very well, right? So yeah, I think there's something like something to say for those sort of and it's hard. It is hard to predict, right? But there does seem to be at least a little bit of safety at this point, at least for me with Game Pass games. It seems like there's a good bet that somebody's going to review that game, right? Because at least it's reviewing out on a big platform for free, and there seems to be reviews coming through.
Well, and I think
unless you're me and you vote for something like Slime Rancher 2, which it did came out on Game Pass in early access, so it doesn't come towards the Fantastic Video League.
But that's
that's a rough one.
Yeah, that's rough. That's rough.
That is an outlier too.
But that's not an indie game, right?
Yeah, that's rough. Yeah. By Monami Park. By the way, go play the game. It is adorable.
It's too bad too, because I hear it's very good. So you probably would have got a fair number for that one too, I'd imagine.
Yeah, but technically, if it released this year in early access, it wasn't ready to release like officially. So it would have been moved to next year anyway. So 0 points for me either way. So there you go.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I do agree too with what you're saying, Abtaj, where I think you're right that there, I think, was more strategy this year as well. Plus, the change with, because you mentioned the 2 counter picks, which I think that was an excellent change. Having another counter, it's especially good, I think, for the draft, for people who get screwed basically at the end and have to pick like a good game. You can still kind of screw others if you then later in the year, you have to think about what are you going to pick, right? Which I really liked that. And then being able to lock in games that you're like, that ain't coming out. You just...
Well, tell me about it. I had the most counter picks against me last year. So there were 4 games that I couldn't drop even if I wanted to, because I really like the rule of if someone counter picks it, you can't drop it. So I think that just makes it fun, even though it's kind of crappy for the person on the other end.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? That is the point.
Yeah.
But, you know, I had a good time, even though I got royally screwed by counter picks against me, because everyone happened to be much more clear.
I also think open bidding was a very nice addition, like being able to see what games are being bid on. I think that introduced a lot of strategy, and it's also nice is that you can see like, what people actually looking at, right? And getting to look at the game and be like, oh, he's bidding that. I'm not touching it. Or you're like, oh, that does look good. And if you look at the budgets are much, well, for those who pay at least, they seem to be a lot of the
I think half of the anyways is same people because it's good to find out coming out that I wouldn't know about. And I'm going to place to the ground also as well. And in this year, the new draft, there's a lot of else I've never heard about. So the bids are like that as well. So you see a big come up and you go, actually, that looks cool. I might try and get it. And so, yeah, I really like public bidding. Kind of, I don't know, I think it adds more competition to it as well. And kind of get a bit light as well, I think, because the biggest problem with Fantasy Critic is, you know, pick it and get it kind of thing. And so you spend most of the year just not even looking at it, which is easy to do, and because there's not really much to do sometimes. But having the live bids come through every week, and like, especially it's up to the player, but you can have it emailed to you and that sort of thing. So it's nice seeing those come through and go, oh, actually I might jump back in and just have a little play around on that and see what happens.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it definitely felt I had fun. It also it wasn't it was almost a little less stressful having the open ones, because you could just kind of be like, okay, maybe I don't have anything that I really need right now, but like, let's just take a look to see if anyone bid on something. And you're like, oh, actually, you know what? That does look pretty good. Okay, I'll make my bid, right? And so like, it was just like a little more. Sometimes with the secret ones, you're just kind of like, fuck, I gotta get this in right now. And it's also interesting because when you put that bid in, and you see one, it's like you start to learn the bidding patterns of the other players. So right? It's like I definitely went through and I would be like, oh, interesting. This person seems to always bid like this, and you're like, all right, well then here we go.
Well, you see the kind of numbers that people try and fool each other with, like, I'm going to bid $6 because then someone else might go for the 5s, or
right. And I'll do 7, but then 11 or 12.
Yeah. eBay maths. Yeah.
Someone's like, I'm going to do 26.
Yeah.
And it's very, and then you see someone win like with a 30 bid and no one else bid, and you're like, oh, sorry, dude.
Yeah.
No, it's worth it. It's worth it. Sick. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about the draft? Because I'm curious to hear like if there was any specific strategies that people used, or if their strategies maybe changed from the year before, or not in terms of it. Because I know for me, I kept the same strategy where, like, at the beginning of the year, my thing, I have changed my strategy for this year, actually, which we can talk about when we get to the new, actually, we'll just talk about it now, screw it. But last year, my thing was like, okay, I'm just going to really go for like what I think would be the big heavy hitters. Also, to be fair, I was at the very end of the list last year. And not going to lie, that did fuck me a little bit. Like, just in my
initial
initial
double-edged sword, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. You do get those 2 picks in a row, which is sick. Now the counter pick is nice, but at the same time, I didn't get any points on my counter pick.
It's that first round pick that really, especially with 15 players like we had last year, like being 15th on the first round, you kind of miss out on those surefire big hitters, no matter what. Like,
and they're quite important in this one, especially this year, which had some serious hitters. Even like Elden Ring coming out for like, holy shit.
Yeah.
So that kind of did hurt a little, but like I was very much just going for like, okay, I swapped it up a little bit where like I tried to look for like not necessarily rumors, but like what maybe is coming out over the year, and made some guesses. I made some guesses that did not pan out. Only one of them got counterpicked, which was nice. Fucking Pokemon, let's go too. I swore something was coming, but no, it's just a new Pokemon game. I still want that game. So yeah, I kind of went along the lines of I did definitely research pretty extensively, and like my researching, and this has worked for me, and it's worked for me, and I think I can say this is a surefire strategy. I came in fucking second this year. I think I have a pretty good strategy for this game, but I don't care about the game. It's the developer. That's what I look at. So I go,
absolutely
right. Developers track record. If they're a brand new developer, hell no. I don't care. You're brand new. I'm not doing it unless you have a strong history in a team. Sure. But if you're a brand new developer, I tend to just stay away, because I'm like, it's such a gamble, right? It could be a huge win, but it could be a massive lose. And so far that's worked out for me, because the ones I picked were from developers that I've enjoyed their games. And then the second part is I do that, and then I check how the rest of their games have scored on OpenCritic. And that gives you a good benchmark, right? It's like, well, they've scored this way. And even if, a game has had like, I don't know, like middling, it's like, if you're getting up into the 80s, I'm totally happy with picking a game like that, right? That's awesome. That's great points. So anyway, that's kind of where I went. I hope that's what a lot of people do, but I don't know.
Well, I think that's what a lot of winners do.
I have to ask,
because it's not exactly what I do, but I don't win, so.
Yeah, like I went the total opposite direction with this, because once again I'm trying to look at my fantasy league like history kind of thing to see like which games I picked like for the initial draft. I think it was like, oh, Slime Rancher 2. Slime Rancher 1 was like one of my favorite games ever, and it is adorable. And it's like, yeah, let's go with that one. And for the slot was the Either, let me check Either an announced game or a new game franchise. I saw Stray, and it was like, yeah, I'm picking this one. I'm taking this one home with me. Like, this one is the one that will award me the most points, which, by the way, it did, but it wasn't like that much, only 14 points, more or less. And then it was like, I'm not sure what I'm going to pick, so I'm just gonna go through the list and pick whatever hasn't been picked, and it sounds reasonably like, at the very least, that is not gonna like take away points from me. Which I picked Silt, which I don't remember what the hell that game was about. And or why I picked it. It's probably because it looked at the time like something either interesting enough for me. And the other game I actually dropped because it didn't release, and I don't remember which game it was. So you can see that I don't even remember what I picked. So my strategy is like, oh yeah, that sounds nice. Let's add it to the list.
Nice. It's the
And
intuitive approach. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, like, and I remember like a lot of the things that I picked were picked before it was my turn to pick. So I don't remember I don't remember which games I put, probably like something Nintendo related, and it got picked by some other person. It was like, well, there goes my possibly 15 or so points over there.
I honestly don't remember what my rationale was. Mine, to the extent that I had one, and let's rip the Band-Aid off, I drafted and then I sort of noped out for the whole year. So yeah, it's interesting to go back and seeing the games that are there. Half of my 2/3 of my game. No, 60% of my games didn't come out. The only ones that did come out was Trek to Yomi, which I fucking hated, but fortunately the critics were a little bit more reasonable.
I really liked that game.
Oh no, it did not land well with me at all.
I loved it.
To take a very, very slight tangent, the parry mechanic felt completely off. It was all a little bit trite. Just didn't speak to me, and I'm sure the game's fine, but I did not like it one bit. And then Modern Warfare 2, which landed reasonably okay. But my memory is kind of similar to Paolo in that I think every time it came to be my pick, the thing that I had in mind had already been nabbed. And so I've got a real hodgepodge of games and then a load of blank spaces. One interesting side note, empty counterpick, minus 15 points.
Yeah, there was a giant warning the entire year.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, that anyone
so
and a few people got
picks early. A
few people got the minus 15, but that's on them because.
And I think that's a fair rule.
You can't miss it.
Yeah, it's a giant thing. Warning: you'll get minus 15 on the counterpick. Yeah,
which would be great if I'd ever opened the page after draft, which I didn't.
And that's the problem, right? I do like how the little there's like a little arrow sign on the counterpick thing at the end of the year. It just says, "Whoops! Since this wasn't filled, you get minus 15." And I'm like, that's nice.
A little bit sly and passes like, you did an upsie.
Yeah, you did a little upsie. Yeah, I mean, we had many more players this year too, I guess.
It was only up a few from the year before. Like we started with about, I think we had 10 or 11 the first year, and then we had like about 13, 14 the next year, and then 15 last year.
Okay, yeah, there was 13 in 2021, and then there's 15 in 2022. So that's not that many more.
Yeah.
It's a healthy number.
The more there are, though, it does kind of, obviously spread everything a bit thinner. And it seems to be a good number, as in there's about that many solid first-round picks each year, I find. Even like you, Alex, being last year, like your picks were a bit slim on that first round.
Yeah.
but I feel like it kind of carries everyone through. Everyone kind of got a good pick in this kind of open season, or not necessarily a good, but a guaranteed pick, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's
like one
that's
of the big names.
yeah, that's the key thing, right? Is like you get at least something like something that's decent. Or gonna come
Yeah.
out. Yeah, and it's also, I have to admit, thinking about even this year, there was games like nobody knows like big games, right? So it just tends to, they're not looking at those types, right, of games, or they're focused on other things. They're from a different niche of gaming, right? And so it's kind of like you just never know in the draft. Like you can get to a point where you'll hit something and you're just like, shit, it's still there. Sounds good, right? And even this year, there's lots of people who seem to get what they were looking for.
Well, and I think you nailed it with like seeing what everyone's niche is, because especially after you get past the first round, you get into like second and third round picks. That's where picks start coming up, and I'm like, oh, I've never heard of that, and or like that's some weird Nintendo game I wasn't paying attention to, or just anything like that. But it means a lot to obviously the person who picked it, who's like, oh, this is the thing. So I find that's really interesting as well, because again, it's another way to kind of see what else is around and things that aren't in my little blinkered view. But yeah, it is interesting. You kind of get an idea. Like some people, you can tell are full indie oriented. Others are big names and that's it kind of thing. Others are like everything Nintendo or everything JRPG, and it's all cool. It's just obviously that everyone's got different focuses where their knowledge lies, kind of thing. Like the things they pay attention to more.
Yeah, I did. I was curious because like last year, like I said, being in the last area, I basically had mostly indies in my list because there weren't a lot of the big ones are sort of gone, which is fine. Like I was like, all right, I'm gonna pick these ones. But this year I'm trying something a little different with my picks, and I'm hoping this is gonna pay off for me. But I decided that I wanted to pick games that were all had a firm release date within the first 6 months and preferably first 2 months, because like all my games that I picked are coming out January, February. And I'm like, because the thing I'm thinking is like, if I can see what my score is in 2 months, I've got a good benchmark, right? It's like, all right, I know where I gotta go. I know what I gotta do. And it also, I'm hoping, will create something to claw at. And I learned a valuable lesson from last year, which is that do not pick a VR game unless the goddamn VR game is coming out on the PlayStation VR, because they just don't get reviewed.
Totally, yeah.
Mine did end up getting reviewed, which was nice. Penguins didn't, which actually probably kept him from getting a much more major lead. Thank the Lord, because the 2 reviews it did get were like in the 80s. So if you're listening,
yeah, no, you're right, and those sorts of surefire ones, like you're looking at your draft for this year, probably half of yours are ones that I had on my list as well. Like, and I would have picked if you hadn't picked them.
Yeah.
Like Horizon Call of the Mountain, which is the VR game.
Yeah.
To me, that's pretty much a surefire thing, and it's got a release date. It's a Horizon game, even if it is VR. It's probably going to do well. I don't see how it could do badly.
It's a locked date too, right? Because it's when the PSVR 2 comes out. It's not moving.
Yeah. It's a launch title, so like they're not messing with that.
Yeah. I suppose that's the only minor gamble. If they misstep with the hardware and that impacts on the gameplay, that could ding the score.
But here's the deal.
We can only hope.
I have no worries. Just because with I really don't. Because when PSVR came out, it was worse hardware, and it reviewed they reviewed so well when they first came out. And they have all this eye tracking shit. It's like the VR. Anyway, we won't get into this, but the PSVR 2 is like, I got it pretty unreal. And like, and the thing you have to think about, right? It's the reviewers, and the reviewers get to play these games in optimal settings, which is one of those things where I'm like, I find tend to skew up a little bit in general than like the overall experience, unless it's an online game, right? That's where there could be a little bit. Like I've definitely picked one game that could maybe be a little like shaky like Diablo 4, but I still think I looked at Diablo 3 and Blizzard was already being slammed when Diablo 3 came out about all their practices, and that game still was in the 90s. And I'm like,
and 3 didn't have a good launch either. Like
No.
people didn't love it at the start. So, and it still did well. So it's Diablo.
yeah, right? And even Immortal, which is arguably like a shite game, it was like a 68 or something, which I'm like, for a mobile game on OpenCritic to get that, I'm fine. So anyway, but that's like, we'll talk more about this in a little bit here, but I'm curious to talk a bit about which game on your roster surprised or disappointed you the most. And I don't know if anyone wants to go first. Actually, Rick, I think what was your most disappointing? What held you back?
Well, it's probably a tied 6th place between my 5 empty regular slots and my empty counterpick slot. But I think in terms of the actual games, it's kind of a cop-out to say all of them, but it's also not entirely inaccurate in the sense that, like, Modern Warfare 2 actually came out okay and gave me a few points.
Yeah, you got 5 from that one.
Yeah,
I was
my
surprised
counterpick
that didn't do better though, because like Call of Duties tend to, like, I'd say Call of Duty would be a lock as a pick anyway. Any year that was coming out.
Obviously, it came out at the time that Activision have had all the harassment and stuff. I think that's probably impacted, 1, people covering that game, 2, how positive people are willing to be about anything that's coming from that direction. Obviously, Call of Duty is like the Activision staple. Yes, you've got the Blizzard stuff, but
And it's
not
saturated.
necessarily considered Activision. It's considered Blizzard, even though it's the same company. I also think because it was quite similar to Modern Warfare 1, and there was talk about gapping it a year, it came off the back of Vanguard. Maybe those things had an impact. I'd be lying if I said I'd really followed the coverage, because obviously I didn't engage last year very much at all. A lot of this is just conjecture.
Well, the other thing to consider as well, which I think would have impacted Call of Duty, which we haven't brought up yet, but last year, like where previous years was COVID kind of messed with stuff, last year it was no one had a modern system. Like no one had a PS5, no one had an Xbox Series X, apart from a handful of people, and obviously critics did as well. But I think that kind of would have impacted, especially like the multiplayer side of Modern Warfare 2 and that kind of thing, because the player base is just kind of truncated a bit, I think, compared to other years.
Well, and also
Yes.
you were dealing with multiple releases, right? Like you're saying, there was still the issue of they're releasing games that arguably were next generation games on, also having to put them on the prior generation hardware, and it was tanking a lot of. I think it tanked quite a few review scores throughout the year because they weren't meant for that. And then now you're starting to get companies being like, "All right, we're done. It's PS4, like." You're done. You're gone. No more. We're just doing PS5, Xbox Series X, and PC now.
Which is the way to do it, and it's what Suicide Squad has done, albeit didn't release this year. So that was a disappointment. Resi 4 Remake didn't release this year. Very disappointing, because that would have absolutely been a massive scorer. And Trek to Yomi, both just as a game itself and also in terms of its critical performance, was pretty poor. That was a fun one where... Oh, what game did it release alongside? It released alongside a game with it was like a Sonic Origins collection, where they had the tick list PDF with all the different things you get in one version versus another, and it's like a rotating background and just the stupidest stuff that you could try and like squeeze out a premium release from. And then Devolver put out a cheeky post of, here's the Devolver like guide to which Trek to Yomi version you're getting, and it was just the one version. And I remember thinking at the time, because Trek to Yomi was an early release last year, I was thinking this is probably going to do quite well. Like Ghost of Tsushima nailed it. This is very much sort of following in that mold stylistically, in terms of the tone it's aiming for and the period it's aiming for. Devolver as a publisher have got a really good track record. So I think out of all of them, that's the one where what I thought it would do versus what it actually did, there was probably the biggest disparity.
Yeah, I thought it would have scored a lot better than it did. Like, because I quite
having
like
played
the game
it, I'm
as
not
well.
surprised it didn't.
Oh man, but that aesthetic.
Yeah, it is a nice.
Yeah.
Aesthetic.
And Credit where it's due, it does it a lot better than Tsushima did, albeit Tsushima is the far superior game.
Well, yeah, but they're like apples and oranges, really. I would say.
Yeah, it's probably fair. But
Anyway.
in the sense that Yomi, like, that was what it was going for all the time, whereas Tsushima had a vision, and then, you know, I'm sure it was more involved, but 11 hour, it just felt like they threw in a filter option for you to turn on. The game wasn't necessarily designed around the sort of Kurosawa black and white with the tinny audio in the same way that Trek to Yomi was, because for Trek to Yomi, that was the default.
Yeah.
Tangent aside, yeah.
We'll talk Trek Yomi later.
Yes.
I don't know. What about you, Abitosh? How are you feeling about your list?
See, I have this thing where I think a game's going to do amazingly, and then it just doesn't, and I have no idea why. Because
Hopeless optimist.
I mean, my first pick was Uncharted: Legacy of Thieves, which is like, yeah, okay, I picked it because I knew it was going to do well. Like, how does an Uncharted game not do well?
Yeah.
But then my second pick, I thought was going to be like, this is the one that's going to nail the whole freaking year for me, which was Ghostwire Tokyo, and it didn't do very well. It got a 76, and I'm like,
yeah.
And I've been playing it too throughout the year, like just amongst other things I've been playing. And I bloody love that game. It's so good. I can see why other people don't.
Okay.
But for me, I'm just like, man, this is so cool. And it's come up on a lot of lists throughout the year of like unique games you need to check out who are doing things differently, kind of stuff. And it's got some quite good ideas and unique gameplay ideas and that kind of thing. But it does kind of suffer from a bit of open world repetitiveness of do the same task in one area, go to the next area, do the same task there, that kind of thing, which is what really tanked it with critics and other people, obviously.
I see.
For me, that's fine because I'm an open world whore, so I'll do all of that stuff.
That's how we're introducing you next time. I hope you're aware of that.
I'll get my tag changed on the forum.
Friend of the podcast and noted open world whore Abitosh. This is something we talked about last year, though, right? Like the idea that what works for you, and not the open world whoring, but like the idea that what works for you and what works for critics en masse is not necessarily one and the same. And
I tried to be a bit more critical and objective in 2022, but obviously not. But it's that thing of like, if I really believe in, if I like everything I saw about Ghostwire Tokyo looked amazing, I'm like, wow, this looks so just fresh and such a unique idea and a different kind of whole storyline kind of palette looking to it. Just looked like an interesting game, and I thought, and it was like quality. It was like good publishers and just they had some good people working on it from other games and that kind of thing. And I was like, yeah, this has got to be good critically, but obviously it wasn't. So it was a bit of a mix there. It was kind of like my own enthusiasm, and I was kind of convinced that it would do well critically. Whereas other games that I had, like Storyteller, and I've picked that again this year. Storyteller for me is a game that I know I believe in, and I know it could totally tank, but I think it's just one of those indie games that's going to be like, whoa, this is so unique and cool. We're all going to give it 100%. But I'm well aware that one could tank, but that's kind of a bit of a love for the game pick for me, Storyteller. Whereas like I also picked Changing Tides, and that's kind of a game that I really like. It also really well, and so picking the sequel was kind of like, I think it's going to do well, and I really like it. So that's the big thing.
on your
political game list because we're like kind of like mainly the first time ranked are released on early access. That was so like, and it's a fantastic game, but early access, that means no points for me. The other one that kind of like I guess I wasn't trying to get with a safe bet, right? That was Kirby in Buffet. Which was a multi game. Like people like Kirby, and at least I thought I was gonna lose points, and I did lose points.
Yeah, it was the wrong Kirby.
That was like,
Other
than that, I had two other games that they released that were in Mini my bracket that my opinion looks very good, and I really want to play it as soon as it comes out. I didn't release this year, and I don't know why, but I put Wizard with a Gun on Let me check real quick what the game was about because I need a refresher on this one.
I'm gonna guess it's about a wizard with a gun.
No shit. But what kind of gameplay is it?
It sounds like a like a one of those like top-down bullet ones. I don't know why. But
Yeah,
that's the
it
vibe
was
I'm getting.
a top-down kind of like shooter kind of game.
Cool.
I
Yeah.
think it was the aesthetic that really got me there. That it was like, yeah, I like this
Yeah.
game. It looks fun.
It looks good.
Again, it didn't release this year. Other than that, those are like the quote unquote disappointments of the year for me, which is like half of my list.
Oh.
Wizard with
Sorry
a
if
Gun
I
was also.
sound a little bit
Sorry.
salty, but even sorry if I sound a little bit salty, even though I didn't participate on the Fantasy Critic League from like I guess June or July or something like that. But it's still I really believe on some of these games that I was like, oh well, I guess I'm not winning anything this year. So at that point, it was like, hey, maybe next year. I forgot to subscribe to this year. So
Yeah, you two
Well,
both.
but that-
Yeah.
yeah,
I was
it's
gonna
not
say
bad.
That's a good reminder for anyone who's playing here that we now got the super drop, which basically means if come September 1st of 2023 and any time after that, if you have less than 65% of the person in first place's score, so if they're on 100 and you've got less than 65, you're allowed to drop any of your games with no conditions or anything. Even if you've got like a bad counter pick that's like holding you back, you can drop that. If you've got a game that scored like minus 20 or something, you can drop that, even if it has been counter picked and all that kind of thing. So that's what the super drop does. So
you
and
can
it's
release
for
stuff.
anything, even if it's released and it's done badly, it's because it's that kind of thing where okay, you're struggling at the bottom, and I know Steve, who runs the site, kind of has tried to bring more incentives to keep people playing when they are down the bottom, and this is one of those mechanics that he's brought in to kind of go, okay, this will give you an extra kind of boost of possibly jumping back up again towards the top.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to win from it, like just dropping a single game.
Yeah.
But it might be able to
Unless it is a
remove
very
that.
bad game.
Yeah, it might be able to remove that bad black mark on your record if you have one at the end of the year. So
Yeah, I mean,
Like getting a
it's something
button
to
in
look
Mario
forward
Kart.
to.
Might get you up to 5th, probably no higher.
yeah,
But it's
Yeah,
fun.
it's the
Yeah.
blue shell basically of the league.
it's a
Yeah.
nice rule because like even for someone who's like I think what I like about it is that like you can't auto win, right? Like the people who are still in the first are still they're not penalized, so it's a nice way to keep people in, and like get them just kind of a little more engaged again, because that's actually what I think was fun about this year compared to last year. It felt a little more second because I got lucky at the beginning with a lot of stuff, and then there weren't a lot of big releases, right? But this year it felt just more competitive in general. Even when there was someone at the top, it was still like they're there, but they're not that far ahead, right? Like it's like they're there, it could change.
Well, and with those later year releases as well and everything, it kind of like if you were near the top, you had to pay attention a bit longer. Whereas, like, 2022 was Alex got ahead and everyone kind of saw if we could catch up.
Yeah. So there was still that like grasping, but there was a lot of competition in the last couple spots too. But yeah, it's sort of you're like, dang it. But it's because the fun of this is like get into it, try to see how high you can get your score, right? And like, so I like that idea of the super drop. I think for me when I look at my list, the obvious one is stupid Pokemon. But that's not a big deal. I don't mind having one thing that doesn't release. That's just 0 points, right? The actual one that pisses me off a little bit is I really wish Pigeon Simulator had released because I swear to God that was going to get me points. I can't pick slot. That game looks like ass, and I'm just like, damn it! I wanted that game to release. In general, like honestly, when I look at my year, I didn't have any like massive ones. I had a lot of smaller but solid games that came out, and I think that should give people, if you're playing, a little hope. If you feel like you didn't get a big game, okay, you just need to get points. Points are all that matter.
Well, and I'd say, yeah, look at the people who were in the top 5 last year. Most of them had pretty much full rosters at least, and were solidly kind of like around the 80s.
Yes,
they might have been late 70s or early 80s, but they were kind of around that score. And maybe you had the odd big one or not, but it's not like they had a roster that was stacked with 90-point games or anything. It's main 2 factors that I found are good counter picks, because Game Zero is actually a good counter pick, and having all your games released and kind of in that positive to you. that will do you well compared to like maybe you had major negative counter picks and games didn't release games that lost points.
And then so you look at Penguin winning one, actually had 2 games in release, but had 198. The rest are all 80s, 70s. And so when you look at that, any game is basically 2 essentially. So you're like, and then it has the zeros of the counter picks. So it's just a really nice balance of points across the board, not necessarily huge hitters. Yeah, it's interesting. Look at it. The only one who had like absurdly huge game was Freud. A 30-point game. That's insane. But Freud got some counter picks that lost points, right? And an actual pick that lost points, and in release. And like when you combine all together, I mean, I still don't think Freud would have had enough necessarily to win. But like when you look at the +3 + 5.9. So if those 2 counter picks hadn't released, he would have had 94.4 points. Oh, and that one game that lost him points would have put up 98.8. So you look at it, you're like, that's 3rd place, and had the game released could have popped you up. So like counter picks and those negative points, they really can like they count at the end, you know, like they really do.
Absolutely, yeah.
All of which is say one manga can't carry. You have to look at the big picture, and it's about the whole roster.
Yeah. So
well, that's the thing. Like Freud still came 4th, even with a pretty good, pretty solid roster. Like because he had a few negatives in there, even with Elden Ring as the 30, he still came 4th because other people were a bit more consistent.
Still had a killer roster though. Like when you look at the roster, it's like, well, actually, maybe that's a good segue into I think what's the next part here. The overview of this is a good place to look at that. We can take a look here at Freud's because I think that makes sense. So yeah, Freud had obviously the games here. Which didn't do as well as I thought it was going to do better. 2.2. That is a little. I don't know. This is the kind of game, right?
And that's why I can't say it like it can't be good. You know, like it didn't review great, but I expected from it.
Yeah,
I would say
this game was more competent than I thought it was going to be too.
Right.
I feel like
as well as Elden Ring, he had Xenoblade, which really scored well as well.
Yeah, those are the 2 big ones. Like Freud's list, if I could give it like a title, it would be like a Japanese list. Like it's very they're basically all Japanese games. I think. I don't know if that one is or not.
I like it, but I would say
but his counter picks I meant are American. Yeah, sorry, that is drafting. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, the 2 counter pick are which is interesting. Probably clearly not a strategy. Just unlike Valkyrie Elysium.
In hindsight, I wasn't because as a Valkyrie, I would have the series like that did not look like a good game.
That was a later. Draft, I think though. That wasn't an initial draft game.
But people had second counter picks.
I had one right.
God knows I didn't use mine, but I'm surprised that someone didn't use theirs on it.
The issue is like you got to get it before it releases, right? And sometimes we don't notice, and then you're like, "Oh shit, I should do that now." And you're like, "Oh, but it's not just a few days before. It's like the full week before that I have, you know, like it's
Well, and with the bidding system as well, sometimes clever people would bid on a game that was coming out like the week that they would have got it from the bid. So left no time to be counterpicked,
Counted.
which is kind of good if that's what you're trying to do. So
Yeah.
That is smart. So overall, yeah, Freud came in fourth place, really strong, really strong finish with just a couple little things. And to be fair to Freud in particular, he was he's first in the list. So he had the last counter picks. So having a counter pick that was only 5.9, minus 5.9 for your first one, it's pretty solid. Yeah. I think the second one, we can't make a, you know, your second one's up to you. So if you lose points on that one, that just sucks. But that's just how the cookie crumbles, right? You never know.
But yeah, he came out pretty well. He had a very solid roster, like from the start. I think he was even leading from the very start because of Elden Ring, because that released quite early as well.
Well, it didn't release.
You know, he was definitely, it was like one of the first ones to release, I think, for our league last year. Yeah. But
and one of only
he was
two
also
players
in contention.
With all 10 releases as well.
Yeah, exactly. And he was definitely in contention all year. And right up to the end, it was kind of like, oh, if he got a good release, it would have bumped him up there.
Oh, I genuinely thought he was going to win. I was like, yeah, Freud this year because like I was like his list is phenomenal. And I guess it shows you just never know, right? But this might be Freud's year this year, so keep an eye on Freud because he makes some good lists.
Well, and he thinks about it as well. Having talked to him, like he strategizes and researches and does the work. So
you can tell because frankly, he's in fourth, but he's only 0.30 away from third place. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
third and fourth are basically the same for 2022.
Exactly. So great list. Average, I think I had a similar issue with the as it went on.
He had a few later picks in the year. I think for me, the picks are blockbusters. Like every single one of. But that's again, like that's thinking about my own perspective more because I know every single one of his games that he picks. Whereas like Freud is half of his roster I've never heard of before. So.
Freud is Japan. Everybody's the West.
It's just there was.
Overall positive, rather. I mean, they were all positive scorers.
Yes.
Of the ones that came out, they were good picks. It was just that. He had like half his roster empty, so
yeah.
And it was a bad counter pick as well. It's a bad counter pick.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate card shark counter pick.
Card shark.
I'm not counter picking the second choice, so not picking the second choice for a counter pick was him 15 points too.
The Dark Pictures Anthology and Shadow Warrior 3, those are like, like Windjammers 2 and Sniper Elite 5, those are giving you I think any game that gets you over 5 points, that's a win. Chalk it up to a win,
That's fair.
Totally.
Anything under, it's like you're like, okay, cool, but you also feel a little like, God damn it, It's like it's just kind of like I'm glad that's there. I'm glad it's not negative, but shit. They're more like the few ones. Why don't we look at Matt's here? Little Toys for Rodney with another very solid one, I think. And honestly,
I'm always a fan of Matt's picks because he'll find some obscure thing that you don't know what's going to happen and pick it.
Like I Am Jesus. Was that on his list this year?
No, but it did release this year.
No, it did release this year.
He might have dropped it from last year. I can't remember. But it was definitely, on his radar.
I think one thing that hit him, and that's too bad, is that Rocksmith Plus not having reviews is too bad. But it is more software than game,
Well, and that's the risk with picks, like other than bad scores, is like picking stuff that won't get reviewed enough. Because I bet you so much on my shit. It's like a non-release. But you can't drop it because it has been released.
Yeah, because his issue really here, score is a little too bad, minus 0.8. Yeah, but really, when you look at it,
surprising.
He technically has 4 games that just either didn't release or got him in the negatives, but good counter picks. So it's like, sitting at the
Well, and
middle
he's
of the
got a lot.
pack.
He's got like 1, 2, 3, 4 that are in the 80s, which is
Yeah.
pretty good. And
But
like
again, it's
another
the
couple in the
roster.
70s. Like, yeah, it's overall they're not bad picks at all. They're
No.
just there's just a couple of misses really, and that was that.
And if Rocksmith
speaking of
Plus
which-
had gotten reviews, and if Avatar had come out, I have a strong feeling that would have popped up pretty high.
Yeah.
For the record, I called Aka being pants, and I just want that to be a matter of note. I got some shit, but I played the demo, and that game was not good.
Well, there's a good advice. Play the demo. But yeah, you're right. I think overall, like, it was just a few little upsets that kept him down. Going to Cafrel, though, who has a very similar list, honestly. And a very
See, I
good
think
That's a
Cafrel
very
got
good
robbed
list.
Yeah.
because of Sports Story, which tanked with -13, and then their counter pick of Final Fantasy 6, which tanked with -16.
That was a
The rest
bold
was pretty
pick choice,
solid.
though.
And he got a points worth counter pick, which is pretty
Yeah, yeah.
impressive with Saints Row.
Yeah, the Saints Row pick was good, but I mean, like, on balance, that's a -10 from his counter picks.
I know. And that Sports
Yeah.
Story one, man, he got robbed with that. That's
Rough.
just
Yeah.
because there was no indication that there was issues until that game suddenly dropped, right? Like,
Yeah.
that to me is not like a case where we can like say like, oh yeah, like he didn't research enough or anything. You couldn't have known that was gonna fucking happen. I thought that game wasn't releasing. That's why it was counterpicked. I thought that game was just not coming out, and then it drops like that. Because when you look at that coming down, I mean, he would have been way higher up.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, just with those, if you got an extra 30 points, you would have been in contention for like second place.
Yeah.
Or no, third place.
Mhm.
Which, is quite a difference to middle of the pack where he ended up being.
Because just that counter
And that's
pick,
what I mean. I feel that, yeah, there are a couple of people in that kind of middle of the pack position who had solid rosters all up, but kind of got a bit robbed, I reckon, because of a couple of nasty kind of results.
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of how the game works. But there are some that you see where
Yeah.
you just feel like, oh, dude, I'm sorry. And that's one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, I was surprised the Pixel Remaster scored that well, but maybe not. Maybe just because it's Final Fantasy VI and it's such a good Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
Abatage, looking at your list. Well, we talked a bit about yours, but solid list. It just, you got bummed by a couple of those counter. Well, you got so fucking counterpicked. Like,
Yeah, well, and that's cool, but it was more like Redfall and Storyteller I probably would have dropped at some point if they hadn't
Yeah.
been counterpicked. Because they, later in the year it's like, well, these aren't coming out, we know that. But and my Victoria 3 pick, I just didn't think that was coming out, but
I
yeah,
know.
that was a definite gamble for me, but didn't pay off.
Yeah. I'm nervous for this year because I feel like I'm going to get a counter pick that's going to fuck me a bit. There's so many good games this year. We'll talk about that in a bit, but yeah, it's going to be rough. And then R2D2, 1999, had an excellent run. Excellent run, no notes. That's my...
Yeah.
I don't know what more they could have done. Like, they picked good games. It's just that a couple of them didn't score super high, and they had one that gave them negatives. But, like...
Just not being able to trade Chocobo GP really screwed them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, that's one way it's like you can't really criticize them for that because no one could necessarily at that stage see
would've
that
picked it.
Squeenix were going to fuck up the microtransactions on that so badly. Like, that's such a left field addition to what should have been, yeah, surefire point scorer.
Because it's a good game.
Totally.
It's just that shit in it, right? Yeah. Yeah, so...
Can I just put a little
Mhm.
side note here of how many games were released in just 1 year, even though a lot of releases were moved to next year? Like, holy
Yeah.
crap, I even forgot that Two Point Camp was released this year and not last year and not the year before that.
And games...
That's
So-
big old
Oh,
Kobe
no.
Club.
Well, and I think that's again coming from the previous 2 years where kind of like half of our picks got delayed, or that's what it felt like anyway.
Yeah.
and then to actually come into 2022 and see most things get released is like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
we're back to this, are we?
Which sort of probably messed with some of the counter picking too this year, right? Because even in 2021, you could counter pick stuff and be like, "It ain't coming out," and then you were like, "It didn't come out," and then this year it's like, "It ain't coming out." Oh my god, they're actually sticking to release dates. You're like,
well,
yeah. Except for big games, it seems like the big ones are the ones that are delayed now, but then others are just like, okay, I don't know. There's no rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah.
Ashgazer, I think, had a similar situation with Rick. I just think it looks like they just kind of dropped off because it seems like they drafted a game with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but then not much else. Not a whole lot to say about this list.
And that's just well, and rosters like that, I don't have much to say because I just figure they got busy and did other stuff.
Exactly, life gets in the way,
which is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I mean, a Memoir Blue is an interesting pick though, because that would have been one of their regular draft picks, and that is
that was their final draft pick. Yeah,
it's an interesting choice. They didn't review well, but I can totally see why that was one that could have been a dark horse in their mind, sort of going into the back end of the draft.
Well, I think as well that it was definitely on Game Pass because I played it, but it's also an Annapurna interactive game, which
exactly
to me kind of I would have picked it because of that alone.
Yeah, signifies some level of quality, and clearly there was a level of quality. It didn't get into the negatives, but unfortunately, it was probably one of the more divisive of those games.
Yeah, for a little kind of artsy indie game, getting above 70 is pretty good, really.
Yeah, and it's a nice one to gamble on, like you say, with the last pick of the main draft.
Awesome.
It's the only noteworthy thing I can think about in terms of the list, other than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet
getting 2
did not
points.
score very well. Yeah. And for obvious reasons, we've all seen the coverage on that, but that must have felt like such a slam dunk. And then just to get almost nothing from it. Like you say, it's sub 5 points. It almost feels like an L.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like the other one like that is Life is Strange Remastered Collection. I thought that would be a lock.
Yeah.
But I ended up getting negative points because of its graphical issues and stuff.
Mm.
But I thought, how can they mess that up, basically?
And they found a way.
They found a
way. Never cease to surprise me.
Yeah, never doubt them. So I ended with some negative points in the year, but it has. I think it's interesting here.
It's kind of a mixed bag. The games that he had released did well.
Very well,
including Alex's favorite Frog Detective 3.
Yeah.
I don't like Frog Detective games, but it's fine. I'm an old grump.
But, there's 4 of 5 in the 80s, even high 80s. Which is pretty great.
Frankly, had they dropped Company Heroes and Herod Howell a bit, and then picked a few more, they probably could have gotten. I mean, there's nothing stopping this list from competitively getting up near the very top. There's 2 empty ones here. Counter picks, yes, there's a -6 with Ghostwire Tokyo, but they gained one with Callisto Protocol, and I really don't think one negative that's below 10 is gonna sink you. It's
especially how good the picks that got released were.
That's the only thing. If there weren't so many empty slots or zeros, then I think Commissar Tommy would have done heaps better. But them's the breaks. That's part of one of them was a counter pick, so he couldn't drop Pigeons in the simulator, and the other 2 obviously didn't come out. But
them's is the breaks.
And then it would have been good if they had good picks, but
yeah, right. I know. Right? That's how so many of this goes, right? It's just you would have done pretty decent, ended with 62 points, which is not that bad. But now, good old General Goods here.
So just before we go on, Commissar Tommy still came in 5th, even with such an empty roster, which kind of shows, because I think the next, we were going on to with Nalbs, he's another one who I think got a bit robbed because he ended up mid-pack, but he had such a good roster and such a consistent roster.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of feels like, in my mind, that he's one of those people who seem to not perform as well as he appeared to perform.
Well, it's interesting.
Whereas, Commissar Tommy had a lot of gaps, but still was up there.
Yeah, because the top 5 had 9 or 10 games released, except Tommy, who only had 5, right? And then the games after, 6th, 10, 7th, 9, 8th, 9. It's pretty wild to see. That's why when I look at this list, I'm just shit. you clearly know games to pick. It must have just been,
Totally.
must have just gotten
Definitely.
busy or like, you know, like missed out a little bit at times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Nalb's list is like so many games. There's so many little things next to it.
Yeah. He's got one. He wins the most icon game.
Yeah, he wins the
on his
icon.
list.
Unfortunate with Callisto Protocol. That really was a toss up, honestly.
Yeah, I thought that was going to do better than it did.
Same.
Just being like, you know, Dead Space developers and all that.
Yeah. But just some negatives here. Not major negatives, but just a few that I think sort of hit it.
Well, surprising as well, like New Tales from the Borderlands. Who thought that would do a negative?
I know.
It was a big question mark going into it, to be fair.
Yeah. That one was certainly a toss-up, but it did seem like one that could have gotten at least in the 70s, maybe even a little higher.
Yeah, it could have done well. Like, there's no disputing that. It could have been a goer.
Yeah.
Sonic Frontiers, conversely, that was a brave choice. And it did come out just for them, in the sense that it wasn't a negative.
Yeah.
1.5, though, is not a negative. So that's that. I think
exactly.
Like Sonic Frontiers.
It's a low bar, but it has cleared it. And that was one of their original picks. So,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
Midnight Sun's good for.
I don't know if I have much to say on this one, honestly. It's just like it's a high risk reward list, I think. When you look at like some of the choices here, they're games that you're like again, Callisto Protocol. Like I would have potentially drafted that. You know, like that's a game that like from the creator of Dead Space, we didn't hear much press about. Like all the press was positive until it released, and then you get all this wave of like developers are left off the credits, yada yada yada. Right, so it's like. You know, I think he made a smart choice going for that. Like, I don't think that's one of those things where it's like, you know, some games you see in the negatives and you're like, yeah, we all saw this coming. But there are games like this.
Times, yeah, like they did what they could with the information they had at the time. So
yeah,
which is all you can do. It's
one question I do have before we move on. What was the reason that Multiverses had to be manually scored?
Open beta.
Yeah, there was I remember reading about it when it came out, or seeing a news article or something where it came out, and as far as storefronts were concerned, it was out.
Sure.
But then on like the devs' Twitter and everything, they said, no, it's in beta. It's not out. And so essentially then the Fantasy Critics site kind of tagged it as it's in open beta, which made it ineligible. But that's why we ended up scoring it anyway, because it had been reviewed. So I manually scored it based on the OpenCritic page, regardless.
Got you. Okay.
But it was because there was miscommunication. The devs were trying to play it down and say, "Oh no, it's in beta still. Don't review us." But like everywhere, it said, "Oh, it's released." So it got reviewed.
Yeah, there's conversations we had there as well. Not for this episode, but what a drop off that game has had. It felt like it was like the rage for about 2 weeks, and then I've heard not a peep since.
Yeah, it's hard to compete with Smash.
It is. It is. It is. I think we talked about your list quite a bit, Paola. I don't know what more we want to say. Yeah. You just didn't have time. You had a busy year.
Just kind of forgot about it. Yeah, but I have to say that when Resident Evil 4 Remake was announced, I was kind of sweating until they said, "Oh no, it's not this year." It was like, yes. Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp was kind of like, for some reason, I thought this wasn't going to release this year. And I was right after the real life events happened and Nintendo decided to push back the game, which was
you were right. Not for any reason you could have possibly predicted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Though I have to say, I am sure if this game were to release, it would have gotten like more than 70 points and I would have been further screwed down the ranking.
Yeah, and it still doesn't have a release date, so who knows what's going to happen with that one.
With Advance Wars? Yeah, who knows?
Who knows?
Should we go to the big cheese? The Penguin, the winner of the year? Who has, I would call, an impeccable list. It's like, it's a very, it's straight bangers. You know, the only one that is like is the Night Witch. That's the only one. And even Hubris is the only reason that that game has a 0 is just because there wasn't enough reviews, but the reviews that were there were very positive. It's like, I don't know what more they could have really done with this one.
Yeah, you can't really
and
criticize anything on that list.
I think there's a good few points to take from it though as well. Like, again, a lot of them have released, but he's still got a 0 and an unreleased in the main picks. So you don't have to have like 10 games that are 80 plus to win. The other big thing is both of his counter picks came out as 0s.
Yeah.
So he didn't have any negatives in it. Didn't have any positives either, but didn't have any negatives, which I think is
Huge.
the main thing you want to try for with a counter pick is not to bomb. Like if you get plus points, that's great, but try not to bomb first.
Yeah. And it's nice because like and I think it's like an excellent point you mentioned too. It's like keep in mind, particularly with our league, we got a lot of players. You're not going to get all big matches. You just got to get a solid 10 points.
Totally.
Yeah,
having something that get released, every game you also release into you'll be up there.
Yeah, big time. Because again, like there's only one that had 5 points, and the rest.
But look at that final pick, like Chain Echoes, released until December 8th. So December 8th, like right at the end of the year, and he gets a whopping 20 points for it, like that.
It literally
won
won him the game. Yeah, he was at 86 before that, and that shows you it goes just last minute.
And I think that's again previous years, because previous years there was no last minute winners. It was just okay, whoever's winning about. November is probably going to win. And whereas this year was or 2022 it was like we've got no idea right up until the final final line.
Hell of a win too. That's yeah, well done, Penguin.
Oh, good fun.
Yeah, Rick, womp womp womp. So from the top to the
bottom, do we have anything else to say on this roster, or have we beaten that dead horse quite enough?
We've beaten it. I mean, you just didn't play. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you've done well with minus 10 points.
What did release wasn't great either, so it's one of those things.
Minus 10 is impressive though. That's the lowest in the league. So,
and that's purely counter pick. If I'd picked my counter pick, I'd probably be in positive points.
It's the lowest ever, so you've got that badge.
I said it was going to be my year.
Should get
in so many ways it was.
Yeah, we'll get Rick some kind of badge or something.
Oh, I'd love that, like a Korok-esque like little turd trophy.
Lowest ever, yeah. Maybe that'll be
the only one with your entire budget left.
Yeah, sounds about right. If anyone else ever beats it, I'd then post it onto the.
In fact, I think you won the lowest in every metric.
Yeah, probably.
You had the least games released.
Yep.
You didn't spend any of your budget.
Yeah.
You had the lowest score ever.
Keep it coming. My victory was total, is what I'm hearing.
The only thing you didn't win was the projected points. You actually weren't last for that.
Oh, there
was
you
I
go.
Not?
No, apparently Ashgazer, who was just above you,
marginally worse. Yeah,
marginally lower projected points.
I'm still calling that a resounding victory.
But I'd say you still shone very bright in 2022.
Or dully, I guess.
You're the best black hole.
Yes, there you go. Oh, that's amazing. We only have 3 left, I think. Jordan is playing, had what looks like, I mean, really, this is just an example of like, there's just not a lot that released, because like, had a nasty counter
and
pick.
And a bad counter pick.
But then had a really good counter pick.
I think that was just a case of like not a full roster, didn't have enough legs to kind of get to the end.
Yeah.
And it's worth saying at the start of the year, Midnight Suns was a gamble pick, because it looked like there might be like microtransactions and stuff, because there wasn't a lot of clarity around the card system and the way that was all going to work. So
but it was the XCOM guys.
Yeah, and that's the side that I fell on as well. And again, not for this podcast, but clearly, the game has landed well enough with enough people. Sports Story, by contrast, they probably didn't think was going to release. It has, and came out clutch.
Hey, that was a good pick.
God damn, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's their second highest scoring anything behind Ollie Ollie World.
And they still got 41 points, even without a lot of games releasing.
Mm.
And that's why I think like Sports Story was a good pick for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
Because I'm sure anyone would have thought, well, if that comes out, I'm screwed. But not if that comes out, I'm doing heaps well.
Yeah, but a nice thing to look at though, that if you do get a shit counter pick, you can potentially even out your counter picks throughout the year with that second one, you know? And to look at it, because if you get points in a counter pick, that shit is bonus.
Well, you can see how rare it is, yeah.
And Dragon.
Dragon, I thought was another one who kind of got robbed because, again, very solid roster, but ended up mid-pack just because nothing really catapulted him too far and he had a bad counter pick.
And the counter pick he picked, I feel so bad. Because I was like,
because it was your game.
Yeah, and it's the one that got that like shit where it's just like, I got those points because it did get reviewed a lot. But anyway, sorry, Dragon. This year is your.
But that's that balance again, though, isn't it? Because like you were saying, like it didn't get reviewed a lot, but obviously got reviewed enough. Whereas there are other games which didn't get reviewed enough that surely would have done well if they had been. So
exactly.
Yeah.
You just never know.
And that takes us probably neatly on to the last one, which is Alex.
So I have to say, before that, I would never counter pick anything Alex picks. Like,
it's a bad idea.
Just foolish.
Unless it's Pokemon Let's Go 2. That
Unless
is a smart
it is something unannounced, but if it's something that has been announced and it has I don't know if it has a relative, but at the very least, it's like, oh, it might come out this year. Because it has been announced and it has a trailer and there's a lot of press around it. Like, yeah, do not counterpick anything that Alex picks. That is a horrible idea.
I think the evidence supports you.
Yes, I make good picks.
I mean, I don't know.
Well, that's definitely something to look at. Is like if you are making a counter pick, look at the person who picked its track record, because that is something to consider. Like if someone
for sure.
If someone does make solid picks, even if you think it's a bit of a mental pick, if they typically do well, it's something to consider.
Yeah,
for real though.
Yeah,
I had what I would call like the average that brings it to the top kind of list. You know, like similar to Penguin in a lot of ways. Like we were
and very solid. Yeah.
I know 90s,
like, again,
but
good counter picks because you just had zeros. Most of you, if not all of your stuff released, and you had a lot of like roughly 80 scores. So you know,
enough to get me to
that kind of solid formula that gets you up to the top. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I don't think we really.
There you go, people read games.
I think it might be excessive to go over everyone's lists for the new year, but I think we can just take a look to see like what things are looking like, I guess.
Well, and for this year as well, like Troy and I are going to do something as like a post draft thing, like we did last year as well. It'll be a bit different and a bit quicker, but yeah, there's that to look out for as well. If anyone's interested, they can check out. I think it's just called HLTB FCL League on YouTube. Yeah. But if you look around on Discord or the forum, you'll find a link somewhere. So
nice.
But yeah, we'll be doing that soon after the draft wraps up.
Sick, because we're almost wrapped up, and this year's looking pretty good so far. I think. Like, I mean, honestly, a lot of interesting picks, new players too. Like, a lot of new players actually, which is new players sounds complete unknown.
Absolutely. Because they paid millions of dollars on this game. So we might only well. That game's gonna do very well.
Well, I think we all knew whoever got it first, that was immediately going to be the first game picked.
Yeah,
well, and
definitely.
In a kind of weird way, that's why I actually don't mind not being first, because you almost have to pick the big game, which is nice because you get the points, and that's kind of the idea. But you don't get any personality in it. You just have to pick whatever's the biggest.
Yeah.
And I'm the kind of I'd rather take a gamble on something that I want to pick. You know.
No,
Said like
Doesn't
someone
mean
who
I'm gonna
didn't
win.
get the opportunity to pick Breath of the Wild. Yeah.
Well, but it's like
Well,
last year
Tears
with
of the
Elden Ring. It's like whoever's first is going to pick Elden Ring.
and it
Yeah.
Whoever's
balances
first
out
this
though.
year is going to pick Zelda.
Yeah, and there's a balance because like he gets to pick Zelda, but now he gets his last counter. He gets the last counter pick. So
Yeah.
Oh, but anyway, who knows what'll happen this year? It's still early days. We haven't got to the counter picks yet, but just about everything's been picked. There are some big games that have been picked here. There's only one unannounced game I think that's been selected, which is Metroid Prime 1.
Which
Ooh.
I love me an unannounced pick.
Yeah. I've heard nothing of this coming out, so this might be an early counter pick for folks. It's definitely a gamble counter pick because if it does release, that would probably be a gangbusters reviewing game. But
I'd be surprised if it doesn't get counter picked, put it that way.
yeah, I'd be very surprised because
Yeah.
there's not a lot of games on this year that I think are like, solid counter pick choices.
Well, I think it's going to be mostly on release dates as opposed to
Yeah.
bad games. Because even like Lies of P is one that I don't know if it's coming out, but if it
Yeah.
does, I think it'll be pretty good.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch like that where they don't have solid release dates, and like Alan Wake 2, it could very easily 50-50, I reckon, like come out this year or not.
Mhm.
But if it does, it's probably going to be has high potential to be very high scoring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, Wonders of Backwards, so I don't know. It's coming out. Among Us 2, brand new studio.
Who knows when that's coming out? Yeah.
And you want that to be exceptional, but also like we've just seen what happened to Tales of the Borderlands. Like personally, I really desperately want The Wolf Among Us 2 to be excellent, but difficult.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the theme so far. Is in like they're all pretty good games as far as the way they've been picked. Like everything has potential and are smart picks, but it's just the release date thing that might, change that one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a pretty good review of what's going on with this year, and a nice little look back at the past year. It's been super fun. I'm really excited for another year of this. Big congrats to Penguin on the win. Let's see if
absolutely
they can hold the crown. No one's ever held the crown, so let's see what happens.
Yeah, we've had a different one every year so far, so
which is really nice too. It's a fun thing to have a swap up every year, and it gives a little more competition. See if any of us can get it back.
Well, and I think it plays into how fun it can be, even if you think like you're behind or whatever. It can change that much or that quickly, and like how Clumsy was behind until like December 8th when I forget the game, but when it came out, that basically won it for him right at the end.
Yep.
So, of course, there's a drop will help with that. I'd say how to change things.
Yeah.
But it's. I don't think anything about it's that predictable, which is why it's kind of fun to
Exactly.
have it does happen, kind of thing.
You're not being at the end of the day. You just know. That's happening.
Every year, we can that fall in my so yeah. Who knows?
We're just going to tell this up. Do your best. Well, hopefully we'll see you here again this time next year. And
I'll be here.
heck yeah, that is it for this year. See you later, folks.
Peace.
Thank you very much.
Bye.